Welcome back. In this video, I will explain how to install plugins for your bucket, spigot, or paper server, and how to manage permissions using the plugin LuckPerms. I will demonstrate only on a paper server. If you need help with initializing a spigot or a paper server, watch my previous videos in this playlist. Feel free to skip to the part that's relevant to you. Now I will show how to install plugins. I will install a couple of plugins, with the first one being Essentials X, a fork of Essentials. It enables quite a bit of functionality, from setting your home to enabling you to fly while in survival mode. Usually you'd want to click the download button at the top right corner, but since there is a download button under the Overview tab, I will click it. Now, before installing, make sure that the plugin is compatible with your server. In my case, it's compatible with Paper, that was built for Minecraft 1.15.2. And since it's my case, then it's compatible. If you're downloading from Jenkins like me, just head on to the download of Essentials X. After downloading, first put a jar file in the plugins folder. Since I first put the jar in the folder and then started the server application has automatically loaded all the plugins in the folder. But if I were to put the jar in the folder after the server has started, I can usually load the plugins using the reload command, which will not only load all the plugins, but will also load the configurations that are not related to the vanilla Minecraft, such as YML files. To remove a plugin, you will need to close the server and then put the jar file out of the folder. That's because the server application will be using them, and Windows will prevent you from deleting or moving any of the files. Now, if you're going to install a lot of plugins, there may be collisions in command names. For example, Essentials X has a weather command as well, which overrides the default weather command. So if I type weather, and I autocomplete it with tab, then if I hit tab to list all the possible autocompletions, I'm not actually getting any weather options, but instead, the first argument is the world name out of these options. Only if I provide a second argument by hitting space, then if I hit tab to list all the possible values, it's sun or storm, and not the ones that are provided by the vanilla command. If I want instead to use the vanilla weather, first I will delete everything. And by the way, I just deleted a word with Alt backspace. Then I need to use a prefix and the command that I want to use. The prefix is basically where does the command come from. If I want to use the weather that's provided by Minecraft, the prefix will simply be Minecraft and colon. And then weather, and when I press tab, the possible values for the argument are what you would expect. By the way, I can enter into selection mode using tab, then I can navigate with tab or shift tab, or the arrow keys. And by the way, I can use prefix whenever I want. So I can use a prefix for Essentials X commands as well, which its prefix is simply Essentials. And then colon and weather like normally. Now, YML, or as it's commonly called, YAML, is a way to store information in a human-readable format that any application on your computer can access. I will modify the main configuration file of Essentials X using the free text editor for developers, Visual Studio Code, which is linked in the description. First, keep in mind that YAML is used for storing information in key value pairs. Hopefully it will become clear in a second. So first, when you see a hash symbol, it means that everything that's coming after the hash is a comment. which means that it can either be in its own line, or I can even put it like this. And from this on, it will still be considered as a comment. A comment basically means that the application that's reading this file will not be able to read this comment, but only the key value pairs. Generally, comments in YAML files are used to provide more information to the person who's reading this file. In the case of this file, it's used to tell us what is the meaning of the key value pair that's below it. For example, this is a key value pair. Why pair? Because this is the key, and this is the value. They are separated with a colon followed by a space or by a new line, and then whatever value that you want. YAML supports a couple of basic data types, including Boolean, which is true or false, number, which is either a whole number like 1, or a number with a decimal point like 2.3. Another supported data type is string, which is a sequence of characters like this one. In the case of YAML, such sequence can be surrounded by single quotes, double quotes, or not be surrounded by anything. And array, which can contain multiple values of what I just said. It can also contain arrays inside it, as well as key value pairs. For example, let's take a look at nickname prefix. Even without reading the comment above it, I can tell that it will control the prefix that will be used on players who change their name using the nickname command. Before modifying, let's see how exactly it works. So, if I type /nickname, actually I can also use a shorter alias, nick, and then I will choose an argument, hello. Okay, you do not have access to that command. Seems like I need to be an operator to execute commands that are provided by EssentialsX. But before upping myself, let's take a look at the array of player commands. This is an array of strings, where a string represents a command that players can use. This array is meant to be used only if you don't intend to use a permissions plugin. The thing that's indicating their strings is that they're not numbers, true or false. But for example, if I want to add another item to the array, I can just hit enter to go to a new line, then make sure that the space indentation from the player commands is the same as the other items, then dash, space, and then whatever value I want. For example, if I type true, then when an application or this plugin will try to access this array, when it comes to true, it will actually see a boolean value, as you can see that it's colored differently. But if I wanted this boolean to be treated as a string, I can just surround it with single quotes or double quotes. One of the items in the array is nick. Let's enable this command for a moment to demonstrate the name change. If I read the comment above it, to enable this feature, please set use bucket permissions to false. I can just scroll up and down until I find it, or I can just highlight, then press Ctrl F in order to open the search tool of Visual Studio Code, and since I first selected and then pressed Ctrl F, it also copied the value straight to the search function, and now I can simply press F3 in order to go to the next match. Voila! So I will set it to false so I don't have to rely on a permissions plugin for now. And by the way, I don't need every time to go to File Save, because I have this autosave enabled. Okay, now I need to force the plugin to read this configuration file that I just updated. I can do so by typing essentials, or actually I will use a shorter alias, ESS, and then reload. Okay, let's try. So if I do /nick hello, I still don't have access. Perhaps I need to use the full-blown reload command. So I will type reload. Are you sure you wish to reload your server? So I have to type reload confirm. So now if I type /nick, and okay, now I'm getting auto-completions, so that's nice. And hello. Alrighty, now my nickname is tilde hello. And if you remember, the tilde came from here. The tilde is actually the default value. Like, not only it comes preloaded with this configuration file, even if I remove this value, so now this key will not have any value, still, my nickname is tilde hello. So now let's change my nickname to, for example, and I added there a space. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, I do have that changed, but no space. So what actually happened is that the string got trimmed, which means that any amount of spaces after the string and before it will simply be removed. So I'm left with this thing. In order to fix this, I simply have to wrap all this value with a space with single or double quotes. So now, excellent. Now let's take a look at the value of nick blacklist. Right now it doesn't have any value, but if I uncomment, which I can do with Ctrl/, now nick blacklist has an array of strings. Well, while technically they're strings, they're actually being treated as regular expression values. One of the properties of regular expression values is that they're case sensitive. So if I enable it, and then let's say /nick notch, then this nickname is not allowed. But like I said, it's case sensitive, so I can actually use notch. To fix this, I can use a regular expressions rule of matching a single character out of a list. So for example, if I want to match both capital and lowercase n, I can just get rid of this capital N, then insert squared brackets, NN, and let's reload and see what happens. Okay, there is a parsing error of YAML. Well, the problem is that the first item of nick blacklist actually has a strange value, because there are actually two ways to set arrays in YAML. The first one is like this, as you've seen, but the second one is with square brackets. And by the way, if you want to use this approach, then the values in the array are comma separated. So let's say I want to have an array of NN, hello. So now this array will have the string NN and the string hello. But this value, as a whole, is basically unclear what are my intentions. Do I want the first item to be an array or a string? And because the algorithm that processes the YAML file will not decide for me, it will throw an error. But I still need to use it as it is right now because it is a valid regular expressions value. So to overcome it, I can simply surround everything with single quotes or double quotes. And now actually let's first turn off my nickname. I can do so with /nick and then my original name, or with off. And then if I try to do /nick notch, it is not allowed. Okay, what about the second item, the carrot dinner bone? Well, it doesn't mean to match the carrot itself, but rather the carrot is a rule for matching the beginning of a string, which means that if I'm trying to use /nick dinner bone, it is obviously not allowed. But even if I try to use dinner bones, it's not allowed either, because the beginning of the string is basically from the first character. So I can overcome it by using .dinnerbones, for example. Okay, nicknames must be alphanumeric. So let's do instead the dinner bones. Alrighty. The reason it was not blocked is because the first character is actually matching, it's a D, but the second character is also a D, it's not an I. So the match has failed, and therefore the nickname was allowed. Okay, now I'll turn off my nickname. Now let's demonstrate the data type number. For example, max nick length. As the key name suggests, it will limit the length of the input of the nick command. If, for example, I will change it to 10, then I can do /nick 0 through 9, but I cannot add one more. Now I'll make myself an operator and test the value of ops name color. So now let's type this, and now my name is colored in dark red. So in other words, the value of 4 causes my name to be in dark red. Let's try to change it. Okay, now it's white. Let's try another value. And it's still white. Let's revert back. Okay, so 4 gave me a dark red. Seems like the plugin expects a certain range of values, yet the previous values were invalid. The server didn't crash though, nor the plugin, since it's using a fallback of the white color for situations like this one. Let's check what values the plugin expects. So, I will go back to the Essentials X page, and if I go a bit down, then I can go to the wiki. Okay, now color permissions. And alrighty. Wait a second. I see that all the values are prefixed with an ampersand, yet the value of ops name color has no prefix. And it does make sense that this wiki page is relevant, considering that the value of dark red is ampersand 4, and we've just seen that the 4 gave my name a dark red. So perhaps if I want to change the name, the ampersand is not needed. So for example, if I want the aqua color, which is ampersand B, then I just need to type B. And it worked. Now I recommend installing a plugin to manage permissions, so you have much more control over the server. But before proceeding, I will set use bucket permissions to true. Okay, now to apply, I will just do reload confirm. Now the plugin I will use is LuckPerms. You can actually use any plugin that lets you manage permissions, such as Z permissions and B permissions. I'm using LuckPerms because I'm familiar with it and because it's highly recommended. It allows you to manage the permissions of individual users as well as entire groups, which you create with the plugin. You can also import an existing permissions configuration file from another permissions plugin, though I won't cover it in this tutorial. But before installing, I need to make sure that the plugin will be compatible with my server. So it has a page in Spigot, and since Paper is a fork of Spigot, then Spigot plugins should be able to run on a Paper server. And in the tested Minecraft versions, 1.15 is listed. And since the Paper build I'm using is for Minecraft 1.15.2, then it should be able to run. So I will just go ahead and download. Okay, again, I'm dragging and dropping into the plugins folder. and reloading. Now, as the owner, you can allow yourself the usage of all the Essentials X commands using the permission node essentials.star. The star, by the way, means apply this action, which in this case is the set command, on all the permission nodes that begin with essentials.something to this user or group. To permit the usage of only some of the Essentials X commands, first look up what command you want to permit, then look up what permission is tied to this command, and finally grant it to the user or the group. So first I will go to the Essentials X official website. Then commands. Then let's say weather. There are actually two weather commands. I need the first one. So let's go to the permissions page. Search weather. So I need the third one. So now to get this command, I just have to click. And it's copied. So for example, I can let topmistake use the weather command and nothing else by giving him the permission node essentials.weather. So the command will be lp user topmistake permission set and paste with right click. Awesome. And now if he will try to set the weather, alrighty. Since topmistake isn't an operator, he will not get any auto-completions due to the way that the server application works. But once I will make him an operator, now if he starts typing weather, he gets the arguments list. Awesome. Now, as long as he has a permission to use the Essentials X weather, even without being an operator, he will have the auto-completions list for that particular command. Only if I want to remove the permission from him, or otherwise set the value to false, as right now it's set to true, only then or alternatively, if I unset it, then you do not have access to that command. Now I will give myself all the permission nodes of LuckPerms by using the star notation in order to use the plugin from within the game. Let's see a neat feature of LuckPerms, the web permissions editor. I can access it with /lp. And by the way, LP is just an alias. You can use basically anything. For example, LuckPerms, perms, perm, permissions, whatever. LuckPerms equally supports all of these aliases. So I will do /lp editor. So this is the graphical user interface of LuckPerms, which is in beta as of recording this video. When I executed LP editor, it basically copied the current state of LuckPerms in terms of the players list, the groups list, the permissions of the players and the groups, the tracks list, the inheritance of players and groups, and even some of the permissions that are provided by plugins that are currently loaded. When I click save, I get this command that when I click will be copied, and once I paste it in the game, it will basically delete the current state of LuckPerms in the game and instead apply the state of LuckPerms in the web permissions editor. Even if I add hundreds of groups from within the game and I apply the command that's generated by the permissions editor, the only state that will be is the one of the permissions editor. So now let's talk about groups. From now on, if I say that a player inherits permissions, I mean that he has those permissions. The same goes for groups. So let's say I create a group VIP that inherits the permission Minecraft.command.time. Then I create a group moderators that inherits permission A, as well as from VIP, which I can do with parent groups. Finally, let's say that top mistake inherits permission B. Now when I add the top mistake to moderators, when I apply the changes, he will in fact inherit the permissions from the group moderators, VIP, and default, as all the default players are automatically assigned to the default group. Therefore, if you add certain permissions to the default group, all the players will inherit those permissions. You can technically change the default group, but it's not recommended, which is why I won't cover it in this video. Now I will apply the changes. Alrighty, now let's verify that top mistake indeed has the permissions that I talked about, including the inheritance. So, /lp user top mistake permission info. Okay, he only has permission B. Well, not really, because a moment ago I instructed LuckPerms to make him inherit from the moderators group. Okay, let's check his parents. So, parent info. Okay, so he inherits from default and from moderators. And now I'll need to list both the permissions of default and moderators. So I have to do group default permission info. As expected, it doesn't have any permissions. Now what about the moderators? It has permission A, so actually top mistake inherits both permission B and A. And finally, let's check the parents of moderators, which is obviously VIP. Alrighty, so in total, top mistake inherits both permission B, permission A, and Minecraft.command.time. If he will try to use it, okay, he doesn't have access to that command. Oh, of course, Essentials X also overrides the time command. So since I gave him the permission to use the time command of Minecraft, he actually needs to use the Minecraft prefix. So and now the time has indeed changed. Note that inheritance has nothing to do with promotion. I will talk about promotion and demotion in the tracks part. By the way, to get the rest of the Minecraft permissions list, you can access this page in the Craft Bucket wiki. And here's the time permission. Now let's talk about metadata. It allows setting prefixes and suffixes, which are used for displaying some text before and after a player's name. Except if you're gonna use LuckPerms like me, it cannot display the prefixes or suffixes by itself. Let's go to the LuckPerms wiki page about prefixes, suffixes, and meta. So, in the LuckPerms page in Spigot, if I scroll down to useful links, I have this wiki page link. Alrighty, now I will scroll down, and this is the page I talked about. Okay, so seems like I need to use the Vault plugin, which was made for Bucket. And since Spigot is a fork of Bucket, then it should be compatible with my server. This is a plugin that's used as an API for making it easier for plugin developers to make chat formatter plugins as well as economy plugins such as shops. In other words, instead of forcing a developer who's developing a permissions plugin to come up with a way to manipulate the chat, all he has to do is to use the Vault plugin, which will do the heavy lifting for him. Then, let's say another developer comes in and develops a chat formatter plugin, which will use the Vault plugin quite easily. And the same goes for shop plugin developers. So let's download it. And again, move and drop in plugins. Then reload confirm. Then you also need to download a plugin that will actually display the prefixes and suffixes. If you're gonna use Essentials X like me, you're gonna use Essentials X Chat. Otherwise, you can use other plugins as well, as listed in the LuckPerms wiki. Some popular chat formatting plugins which work with Vault include, and Essentials X Chat is listed indeed, but I don't actually have to click it, because it's already open. So now I will download Essentials X Chat from here. And then also in the Essentials X configuration file, if I go to the chat key, I can use some pretty cool features here, such as the format setting. And as you can see in the comment above chat, I must have Essentials X Chat installed. I personally don't like the angled brackets around the display name, so let's change it. Awesome, now the name displays beautifully. If you want to customize it even further, you can also go to this link. And there you can learn from the Essentials wiki a little more about chat customization. Now back to prefixes and suffixes. The most important thing to remember is the subject of priorities. Basically, the prefix that will be displayed is the one with the highest priority compared to the rest of the prefixes that the user inherits. The same goes for suffix as well. I can set either one using two ways. Using a permission. So for example, let's give myself a prefix of owner. So it begins with prefix dot, then a priority number, for example 10. I can actually use any number that I want, it doesn't matter. And then dot, and the prefix that will be displayed. Alrighty, let's apply the changes and see what's changed. Alrighty, so now if I type something, okay, it displays pretty ugly because there is no space to separate between the prefix and the name. So let's add a space. Awesome. But let's also apply a color code so that the whole owner will be colored in, let's say, green. So first, let's investigate what is the color code of green, which I can do with the color permissions from the Essentials X wiki. And then, okay, here is green, so I need ampersand A. Alrighty, let's apply. Okay, cool. Now it looks pretty nice. Now let's apply prefixes to VIP and moderators as well. Alrighty, so now if that mistake will type a message. Okay, so now he has the moderator prefix despite of inheriting from VIP. And that's exactly the power of prefix priorities. Okay, now the second way to change the prefix or suffix is to use the chat command. Okay, first let's make that mistake inherit from VIP instead of from moderators. I need to actually modify his parents. So parent, remove moderators. And add VIP. So now, okay, that prefix looks pretty ugly. Let's uppercase all the letters in it. I can do it by either making VIP to inherit from the appropriate permission, or I can do it using a dedicated prefix command. So, /lp group VIP meta set prefix, and then according to the syntax, I actually provide first the priority number, so let's give it the same as 2, and then the prefix itself. But also, let's color it in, for example, blue. So, ampersand 9. And let's do VIP, little space. Then if you provide another argument, it will be used for setting the context. If you don't, the context will just be global. I will talk about context extensively later. Alrighty, so if that mistake will type a message. Okay, now his entire nickname is colored in blue. What the hell just happened? Well, basically, it's the same behavior as the MOTD in the server.properties. And the process to fix it is also the same. In other words, if I want to reset the nickname from whatever point, I use &R. So, in order to make the color apply only up to the VIP and not over, I will just put right here after the bracket &R, and it looks normal. Now let's talk about tracks. Basically, they enable you to have ranking systems. Think of a track as a ladder. You create a track, then you add to it all the groups that you want to be linked in a chronological order. So, let's create a new instance of the LuckPerms web editor. Let's say I want to link between moderators and the VIP. Well, they're technically linked because the moderators is inheriting from VIP, but they're not linked in a way in which I can automatically promote top mistakes so we can be in the moderators group. So to achieve this, I can go to, next to the tracks, the plus. Then let's call the track, for example, ranks. And then I need to add groups in the order that I want them to be linked. Whereas the first group I will add will be at the bottom of the track. So let's say I want VIP to be linked with moderators, so that by the direction of the arrow, when top mistake is in VIP, he will be promoted to the moderators group. Alrighty, let's apply the changes. Okay, now, if top mistake will type a message, obviously he's still in VIP. But now, all I have to do to make him inherit from the moderators group is simply promote him. To do so, I can do /lp user top mistake promote and then the name of the track. Why I have to specify a name? Because top mistake can be a member of multiple groups, which many of them are linked to different tracks. So I have to specify the track name in order for LuckPerms to know what group should he be moved to. Okay, so now he is in moderators. Awesome. If I will promote him again, he is still in moderators, but if I demote him, now he is in VIP, and if I demote him once again, now he is not in any group. So now since I promoted him in the ranks track and he wasn't in any group, he was automatically pushed to be in the first group in the track order, which is VIP. Awesome. Note that moderators is higher up in the track order, despite that it's inheriting from VIP. That's because the order of the groups in a track has nothing to do with inheritance. Now I'll talk about setting stuff to last temporarily, so that it expires after a certain amount of time. Let's say you decide to start an event on the server, so that everyone will be temporarily added to a group with special permissions for a certain amount of time. To achieve this, let's create a new group, let's say spatial. It will inherit a permission that no other players or groups have. For example, let's look up in the permissions page of Essentials X. And let's say the permission tree. So, if the user will be using /tree and a name of a tree, it will basically spawn a tree where he is looking at. So now let's make spatial inherit this permission. So /lp group spatial permission set. Awesome. And now let's make default temporarily inherit from spatial. So /lp group default parent add temp, and let's make the inheritance last 1 minute and 10 seconds. Right. So obviously I need to also specify what group I want default to inherit from. So spatial, and now, alrighty. And now he no longer inherits from spatial as well. Here is the list of the time units. Let's try to apply this inheritance from the Web Permissions Manager. So, if I do parent groups, spatial, and then expiry. Okay, seems like I can only specify what day I want the permission to expire in, so I don't have that much flexibility compared to the command line version. But keep in mind that it is in beta, so the developer of LuckPerms will add this feature eventually. Now I'll talk about context. In simple terms, it's like saying something will apply only if this context will apply. The something can be a permission, an inheritance, a prefix, a suffix, or a temporary thing. The context can be a server name, a world name, or a proxy if you're using a bungee cord proxy. For example, I will go back to the Essentials X permissions page. Let's take a look at the command jump. Okay, so let's say I give top mistake this permission. True. And only while he's in the nether. I can do so by limiting in which world he's in. So let's do world equals world nether, and okay. So now let's say he enters the nether. Alrighty. And now he can actually use the jump command. But once he exits the nether, he can no longer use the command, because the context limits on what circumstances the command can be used. Now let's say I change my mind and I allow him to use a jump command regardless of any world or any server that he will be in. In that case, I can change the context to global by simply getting rid of these values. Alrighty, so now he suddenly can jump. For more information about LuckPerms, go to the wiki on GitHub. The same goes for Essentials X. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below.